Hey guys, Bird here, bringing you another lore versus canon video. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank you guys for your comments on the last video. I was pretty nervous about putting it out, and I was worried that it'd be something people just weren't interested in, but the response has been really awesome, and I'm glad that you guys seem to be enjoying it. I've always loved to learn new things, and if I can make that knowledge a bit more interesting for other people, then that's a pretty good feeling. Alright, enough of that crap. Let's get into what you guys are here for mythology and God of War. Today we're going to be talking about the alluring Witch of the Woods, Freya. Just a heads up, the lore part of this video is going to be a bit longer and more detailed than my previous video about Baldur. That's because there is a ton of stuff to unpack with this goddess, and honestly it was pretty hard deciding what I could cut from the script without leaving out some pretty important facts about Freya. Also, the lore for Freya is pretty complicated and contradictory, so I'm going to try my hardest to keep it as simple as I can so that we don't get lost. Now with all that out of the way, strap in folks, it's time to learn. Part 1. The lore. Freya is one of the preeminent goddesses of Norse mythology. She belongs to the Vanir tribe of deities, but she became an honorary Aesir after the Aesir-Vanir War. Her father was Njord, the Vanir god of the sea, while her mother is technically officially unknown, though most suspect that it might have been Nerthus, Njord's sister. Ew. She had one brother that we know of, Freyr, and a husband named Odr. Now, some of the folks here with a passing knowledge of Norse mythology might think that the name Odr sounds pretty similar to Odin. Yes, it does. Don't worry guys, we're going to get to that a little later. Freya is known to be fond of love, fertility, and fine material possessions. She also has a chariot that is pulled by cats. I can say with absolutely no exaggeration that this is the coolest fact I have ever learned about anything, ever. She passionately seeks pleasures and thrills, and honestly, it's easy to dismiss her as sort of the party girl of the Norse gods. At one point, she was even accused by Loki of having slept with all of the gods and elves, including her brother. Which, can you blame her? I mean, it clearly runs in the family.
Who taught you how to do this stuff?
You, alright? I learned it by watching you.
While it's easy to just chalk Freya up as a promiscuous party girl looking for thrills and a fun time, she's actually so much more than that. Freya is considered the archetype of the vulva. A vulva is a type of Nordic witch who has forsaken family bonds and her role in society to travel to different villages to perform commissioned acts of satyr magic. A vulva would perform these acts in exchange for food, lodging, and other forms of compensation, and her arrival would often be met with equal parts exultation and fear. Vulvas had a history that could be traced back to the original Germanic tribes, and they were greatly respected for their ability. Satyr, the magic that they performed, was a form of magic that focused on discerning and altering destiny. Freya is often credited as the one who brought this form of magic to the gods and, by extension, to the mortals. She was an expert at controlling and manipulating the destinies of others, and her knowledge and power were almost without equal, even amongst the gods. So, yeah, do not piss this party girl off. In addition to her powers as a sorceress, Freya was also associated with the Valkyries. She occupied the afterlife known as Folkvanir, the field of the warriors, where her chosen warriors dwelled after they were slain in battle. Among the warriors killed in battle, half were chosen by Freya to occupy her hall, Sestrumnir, a dwelling that likely fulfilled the same purpose as Valhalla. The rest would go to Odin, and they would occupy Valhalla. Scholar Britt Marie Nostrom theorizes that the selection process may be a result of different forms of initiation of warriors, with one group dedicating themselves to Odin and the rest to Freya. This also connects Freya pretty strongly with the Valkyries. The title of Valkyrie means chooser of the slain, and they fill the role of guides of warriors killed in battle and deserving of paradise. We see more proof of this connection in the Gylfaginning, where Sturluson describes Freya as a goddess who rode into battle to take her half of the slain and guide them to Sesrumnir. So there is definitely more to Freya than meets the eye. But as interesting as her ties to the Valkyries are, her role as a sorceress cannot be overlooked because it literally stems from the origins of Nordic mythology and Germanic culture itself. Viking culture ultimately originates from a time period known as the Volkavandrung, or the Migration period. This time period was roughly between 400 to 800 AD, and it was a time of migration of the people within and into Europe. This period coincides with the decline of the Roman Empire, as it was characterized by the Germans and the Huns invading Roman territories and sacking their cities. Kind of goes without saying, but the Romans remembered this period of history just a little differently, and they refer to it as the barbarian invasion. Come on, guys, can't we all just get along? During the migration period, the Germans were not yet called Vikings. Instead, the prominent social institution was the warband, a tightly organized militaristic society presided over by a chieftain and his wife. The wife held the honored title of Veleda, and her role was to use divination to foretell the outcome of suggested plans, and to use magic to influence those outcomes. Does that sound familiar? It should, because this practice eventually evolved into the traveling vulvas, who performed satyr magic to achieve the same goals. So, what does that have to do with Freya? Well, this social construct was based on the mythological pair Frigya and Vuonaz, with Vuonaz being the chieftain of the warband of the gods, and Frigya serving as the Veleda. These deities would eventually evolve into Freya/Frigg and Odin. Now, I know what you're thinking, but wait, I thought that Freya was married to some guy named Odur. And why is she being merged with Frigg? Were the Norse gods into some poly-loving or something? Well, there's a reason why historical sources often refer to Freya and Frigg as though they're the same person. It's because technically they are the same person. Remember when I said that the lore surrounding Freya was complicated and contradictory? Yeah, strap in, folks. Part 1.2: Frigg and Freya. The later Old Norse literary sources clearly describe Frigg and Freya as being two separate goddesses. The problem is the differences between them are really superficial at the end of the day, while the similarities run pretty deep. They're both married to wandering warrior gods whose names are evolved forms of the original chieftain Vodanaz. They're both accused of infidelity to their husbands by Loki. They're both practicing vulvas with the power to see and alter destiny. Even their names refer more to each other's attributes than to their own. Freya means lady, which is more of a title than a true name, while Frigg comes from the ancient root meaning beloved. Put together, they are the beloved lady, which I personally interpret as an allusion back to the original goddess Frigya. Frigya, as the Veleda of her tribe who foresaw and manipulated the tribe's destiny, would have likely been considered the beloved lady of the warband. Okay, so they're clearly the same goddess. Why separate them in the later literature? Well, that's because the culture of the Germanic pagans changed, so their mythology started to change as well. Germanic mythology originated during the migration period, and the mythology of a culture is typically based around that culture's social hierarchy and its prevailing way of life. The original warbands had two main leaders, the chieftain and the Veleda. So, when you think about it, they only really needed two prevalent gods, Vudanaz and Frigya. During the Viking Age, the formal warbands became informal and often leaderless groups of roving warriors. These are the people that we know today as the Vikings. The warband was no longer relevant, and therefore neither was the original mythological structure that characterized it. Vudanaz was no longer considered the chieftain of the warband of the gods, and Frigya was no longer thought of as the Veleda. So their roles were interpreted to reflect the changing times and cultural norms. Part of the reinterpretation involved splitting Frigya into two goddesses. But why are the two goddesses so similar? If you're going to bother splitting them anyway, why not give them more distinct characteristics? Well, that's actually what the Germanic tribes were doing. The only really notable difference that I could find between the two goddesses is Freya's connection to the Valkyries. I scoured a lot of resources, and I could not find anything that connected Frigg with the Valkyries. So I assume that this was a characteristic that was distinctive only to Freya. I find this really interesting because I think it's possible that the Germanic pagans were starting to see Freya as a bit more of a warrior goddess than Frigg. Ultimately, the problem is that they simply didn't have enough time to fully separate the two goddesses. Mythology is deeply rooted in the culture of the people who create it, and it takes a long time to evolve and for new ideas to become accepted among the masses. Frigg and Freya's evolutions were interrupted by the arrival and acceptance of Christianity. So basically, you have two Norse goddesses with only minor differences because Jesus. Honestly, this is kind of disappointing to me. I can't help but wonder how Freya would have evolved if not for Norse mythology falling out of practice with the people. They'd already differentiated her and Frigg by making Freya into a frickin' Valkyrie. Maybe she would have eventually evolved into more of a warrior goddess, like a really kick ass type of chick. Hell, maybe they'd have straight up made her into Xena. Awesome. Part 2. The Canon. Before the events of God of War, Freya wasn't just a member of the Vanir tribe, she was its leader. She was also a fierce warrior, at one point becoming the queen of the Valkyries. She was powerful in both combat and sorcery, but also was just and fair in the usage of her powers. She preferred to use her spells and her strength for the betterment of her people, not just for personal gain. During the war between the Aesir and Vanir tribe of gods, Freya agreed to marry Odin in an effort to bring peace to the tribes. She also taught Odin some of her magic, possibly in an attempt to bridge the cultural gap between their people. But Odin chose to use satyr magic in cruel ways, even against his own wife. Eventually, she decided to leave Odin because he was, well, a bit of a jerk, really. Unfortunately, she couldn't go back to the Vanir tribe because they saw her marriage to Odin as a betrayal, so she decided to take refuge in Midgard. Odin, rather annoyed that any woman would dare to leave him, used the magic that he'd learned to strip Freya of her Valkyrie wings, trap her in Midgard, and curse her to never be able to harm any living creature, even out of self-defense. That last one was done purely out of spite, because Freya was a warrior at heart, and the curse would force her to live in isolation for the rest of her days. And you thought your last breakup was bad. The only thing from Freya's marriage that brought her any happiness was her son Balder. I know that I made a joke in the Boulder video about her being a bit of a helicopter parent, but her actions make sense when you consider that the only bright light she had in her time with Odin was her son. When she saw in the runes that he would die, absolute terror drove her to take a very drastic action, casting the spell of invulnerability over him. She didn't want to lose the only happiness that she had in her life after Odin's cruelty, but she didn't think the ramifications of her spell all the way through. While Balder was completely invulnerable, he also couldn't feel any physical sensations, good or bad. And in the end, her desire to save him ultimately drove him away from her. When he demanded that she remove the spell, Freya told him that she didn't know how to. But we know that this was a lie, because when she sees Atreus carrying mistletoe arrows, she immediately burns them, and she demands that he and Kratos never carry mistletoe weapons, claiming that they're cursed. After sacrificing her happiness, enduring endless humiliation at Odin's hands, divorcing her husband, being effectively crippled by vengeful curses, and inadvertently driving her only child from her, Freya's honestly a bit of a broken person by the time Kratos and Atreus meet her. She's forsaken all contact with the outside world and has hidden herself away deep in the forests of Midgard. This is when we have our, memorable encounter.
What did you do?
Oh shit.
Atreus!
Part 2.2. The Witch in the Woods. When Kratos and Atreus first meet Freya, they, kind of put an arrow in her friend. Not exactly the best way to start off a relationship. Fortunately, she's surprisingly forgiving once they help her heal him. She even grows fond of Atreus as the game progresses. Atreus clearly likes her as well, though Kratos remains rather uncertain about her when she reveals that she knows he is a foreign god. She also worries about Kratos' decision to hide Atreus' true nature from him, but in true Kratos fashion, he completely ignores her. Freya proves to be very helpful to Kratos, guiding him to the realm of Alfheim, gifting him with the Bifrost, and even resurrecting the severed head of Mimir in order to aid our heroes in their quest. However, Mimir accidentally reveals Freya's true nature to the boys, and this causes Kratos to storm out of her hut in a rage. To be fair, considering this guy's track record with untrustworthy gods, can you really blame him? But Kratos is forced to seek her help once again after his fight with Magni and Maudi, where Atreus falls ill and collapses. Freya is able to save Atreus after Kratos travels to Helheim to get a rare ingredient for her. I mean, why not? A quick jaunt through hell is pretty much a requirement for these games anyway. As Atreus recovers from his illness, Freya opens up to Kratos about the mistakes she made in the name of protecting her son. She understands Kratos' fears of what Atreus could become if he knew of his godhood, but she warns him that her overprotectiveness cost her the child that she loved, and she laments her decisions every day. However, she never reveals that the child she mentions is Balder. Kratos and Atreus learn of Balder and Freya's connection when they venture back down to Helheim, and the realization that Freya has continued to keep secrets from them causes them to be a bit more guarded the next time they see her. Before she can learn of their discoveries, however, Balder appears, and he does not look like he wants to just have tea and a chat. Part 2.3: Battle with Balder and Freya's Future. While Kratos and Atreus fight Balder, Freya desperately tries to separate everyone and talk her son down, but Balder is too full of rage to be calmed. During the fight, he punches Atreus in the chest, causing the mistletoe arrowhead in his quiver strap to pierce Balder's hand. To Freya's horror, the curse is finally broken, and for the first time in over 100 years, Balder is vulnerable to death. At one point, Freya uses her magic to revive the frost giant Thamur to try and separate the fighters. She pleads with Kratos not to harm her son, even as Balder gleefully climbs the giant attempting to kill her. Kratos knows that Balder is beyond reason, but Freya is still trying to protect her son, even if it means dying in the process. After Kratos finally manages to subdue Balder, he refrains from killing him at Freya's request, and she tries one more time to help her son see past his resentment to understand why she cast the spell on him. Finally realizing that she simply cannot reason with him, Freya finally gives up and decides to let Balder kill her, knowing that it's the only thing that will bring him some peace. As Balder strangles her, she tells him that she loves him, but Kratos stops him and snaps his neck before he can finish the deed. Horrified, Freya swears vengeance upon Kratos for killing her son, and she forces him to reveal to Atreus that his past is very violent, and it is full of dead people, both good and bad. After Kratos and Atreus return from Jotunheim, Mimir tells them that in the time they were gone, Freya visited him, and she demanded to know where Odin hid her Valkyrie wings. It's very likely that Freya will return in the next game, her Valkyrie powers restored and thirsty for revenge against Kratos. Part 3: Conclusion. Freya's in-game character had more connections to her mythological counterpart than I expected. She's a powerful sorceress, a fierce warrior, and she's married to the formidable Odin, or some form of him. However, she isn't Balder's mother. That title has only ever been held by Frigg. And there also aren't any sources stating that Freya's marriage was particularly abusive or unhappy. In the myths, Freya is even known to weep tears of scarlet and gold for her husband when he is not with her. That doesn't exactly sound like a woman ready to ditch her man. The changes to Freya seem to have been done to create a very sympathetic character who was ultimately in a very difficult position. Even though Kratos did save her life, I think most people can understand why she's still so upset with him. Balder was the one good thing that came from her decision to marry Odin, a decision that she only made for the good of her tribe. This might get a little personal, guys, but do any of you have someone close to you? Someone that even the thought of losing them causes your throat to close, your eyes to sting, and a cold chill to settle at the base of your spine? What if you had a way to keep them from dying? A way to protect them forever so you would never have to suffer the pain of losing them? Would you do it? It's admittedly really easy to condemn Freya's actions, but we have to remember that they were the actions of a woman who loved her son more than anything. When someone is so important to you that your very happiness depends on them, there's no telling what you might do to keep them with you. Freya's actions come from a parent who wanted her child to be protected from everything, but it came at the cost of robbing him of the good experiences of life as well as the bad experiences. If that's not a metaphor for helicopter parenting, I honestly don't know what is. Kratos, meanwhile, is a bit more blunt with Atreus. He forces him into situations that push him and test his skill and his nerve. But this parenting method has drawbacks as well. Atreus truly believes that his father does not love him. He thinks that Kratos sees him as nothing more than a burden. And when he loses his mother, the woman who provided him with love and affection, he has a really hard time dealing with the loss. Kids need to make mistakes. They need to experience life. But they also need to be assured that someone loves them, that they have a safe place they can come back to when things get rough. Freya's mistakes are there to show Kratos what he stands to become if he hides things from Atreus. But her unconditional love for her son reminds Kratos that no matter what your kids may do or say, they're still your kids. You're still gonna love them no matter what. God of War is a story about mythology, hardship, and epic battles. It's about overcoming obstacles, making allies, and changing the world. But it's also a story about parenting, about the old generation teaching and molding the new generation into something better. Our future as a society rests on the next generation, and to that end, Kratos' words hold the most truth of the entire game.
The responsibility is far greater. And you must be better than me. Understand?
But that is just my own opinion and interpretation, and I really would love to hear yours. If you liked this video, please throw it a thumbs up and feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Is Freya ultimately a good person? Is she a good parent? What do you think determines a good parent? And what role, if any, do you think she's going to play in the next God of War game? I don't really have a publishing schedule for my videos, so if you want to make sure you don't miss a video, hit that subscribe button and make sure to ring that bell. But either way, I greatly appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I really hope to see you soon for another episode of Lore vs. Canon. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one.